There's a reason Jung called individuation the adventure of a lifetime. Not a project, not a goal, but an adventure, the kind that demands everything you've borrowed from others. When he spoke of becoming yourself, he didn't mean a self-improvement slogan or a personality tweak. He meant a descent, a stripping away of the borrowed faces that helped you survive the world, but kept you from knowing who was underneath. Individuation in Jung's sense is not about becoming better. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness, contrary to modern optimism, includes the shadow, the wound, the chaos you've spent years outrunning. Jung saw the psyche not as a smooth mechanism, but as a wilderness, a living ecology of light and dark, conscious and unconscious, each needing to find its rightful place. The danger begins when you mistake adaptation for authenticity. When you settle for the persona, the social mask that wins approval, but costs the soul its voice. You were trained to wear this mask early, to smile on command, to suppress what was inconvenient, to earn love by shrinking. The persona became armor, but also a prison. Jung warned, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. In trying to meet expectations, you inherit their ghosts. You walk their unfinished paths. Individuation asks you to turn around, face those ghosts, and ask, what is truly mine to carry? This is where the journey becomes dangerous, because the first step toward authenticity is betrayal, not of others, but of the false image they have of you. When you begin to withdraw your projections, the traits you've exiled into other people, life starts to reconfigure itself. Relationships shift. Familiar rooms feel foreign. You may be accused of changing too much, becoming different. But that accusation is proof of progress. The ego resists this transformation fiercely. It prefers the predictable misery of imitation to the unpredictable freedom of selfhood. So it distracts you with ambition, approval, moral superiority, anything to avoid the inner work. Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." He wasn't glorifying pain. He was naming the process. Enlightenment isn't escape, it's integration. To make the darkness conscious means to look directly at what you fear most, the anger, envy, need, and shame that contradict your ideal image. Most people stop here believing the shadow is a monster to be slain. But Jung knew the shadow is not evil in itself. It's the part of you that never had permission to live. If you reject it, it takes revenge through projection. You begin to see in others what you refuse to own. Every enemy, then, is a mirror smudged with your own reflection. The path of individuation is littered with such mirrors. Each encounter with another person, each conflict, each desire, each dream, all are invitations from the unconscious, urging you to wake up. But few accept the invitation because it requires descending into the very thing modern culture teaches you to avoid: solitude. In solitude, the noise falls away, and what remains is terrifying your own voice, unmediated, demanding truth. Jung's most dangerous idea is that no one can walk this path for you. Not religion, not science, not ideology. The psyche obeys its own laws older than civilization. You can borrow guidance, but never identity. Individuation means standing before the mystery of existence, naked, unshielded, and saying, "I am here." The cost of becoming yourself is the death of every version of you that was designed to please, to belong, to be safe. And yet, this death is not annihilation. It's initiation. The persona cracks so the self, the divine center of the psyche, can emerge. Jung compared it to alchemy, the lead of the ego transformed through suffering into the gold of consciousness. But the alchemists knew gold requires fire. Transformation is not tidy, it burns. Most people want change without combustion, awakening without the night. They ask for meaning, but fear the emptiness it demands. Jung understood the psyche will not evolve without tension. The opposites, love and hate, faith and doubt, reason and instinct, must collide until a third thing is born, something larger than either pole. He called it the transcendent function, the reconciliation of the opposites within. To live, this is to let go of certainty, to allow contradiction to live in you without choosing sides. That is why individuation feels like exile. You no longer fit where you once did. The old gods fall silent. The systems that promised safety crumble. But in their ruins, something vast begins to breathe through you, the whisper of the self saying, "Now we can begin." The danger, then, is not in the process itself, but in resisting it. The more you cling to comfort, the more violent the unconscious becomes in its demand for recognition. Symptoms, breakdowns, losses, these are not punishments. They are messages. The psyche will dismantle every false foundation until only the real remains. And that real, Jung insisted, is always rooted in the numinous, the direct experience of meaning that no external authority can define. If you're walking this path, understand you will lose things. People, roles, illusions. But what remains will be yours, not inherited, not imposed, but discovered. The danger of becoming yourself is also the doorway to freedom. Individuation is not a theory to study, it's a fire to step into. And only when you stop running from that fire does the alchemy begin. The second movement of Jung's idea begins where the first ends at the fire that purifies and the fire that threatens to consume. Jung never promised that individuation would make you happy. He promised that it would make you real. And reality, once it floods in, exposes everything you built to impress the world. When the persona burns away, you are left standing in the ashes of certainty. What used to give you direction, titles, relationships, achievements, suddenly feels hollow. It's like waking up in a familiar house that has quietly shifted its walls overnight. The furniture of your identity no longer fits. This disorientation is not failure, it's initiation. Jung called it the night-sea journey, borrowing the mythic image of a hero cast into darkness, swallowed by the unknown. In mythology, the hero does not find new lands by following the map. He finds them by losing the shore. In the same way, individuation demands a kind of shipwreck of the ego. You cannot sail toward yourself without letting the current of the unconscious pull you under. Dreams, synchronicities, irrational impulses, they rise from the deep, demanding attention. This is the psyche's way of communicating what logic cannot hear. You begin to notice patterns, the same symbols repeating the same faces, appearing in different guises. The unconscious speaks in images, not arguments, and every image carries energy. Jung called these forces archetypes, primordial patterns of the human experience that live in all of us, the child, the mother, the shadow, the wise old man, the anima and animus. They are not characters in a story. They are the story itself replaying through our lives until consciousness recognizes them. To encounter an archetype is to feel both ancient and intimate. You sense you are living something older than your biography. The lover's longing, the warrior's courage, the exile's grief, these are not personal quirks but human inheritances. The psyche doesn't invent them, it remembers them. But here lies another danger: to confuse the archetype with the ego, to mistake the symbol for the self. Many people touched by an inner vision or revelation become inflated. They identify with the god instead of serving it. Jung warned that inflation is the most treacherous stage of individuation. The ego, intoxicated by glimpses of the self, declares itself divine. That is why humility is the safeguard of transformation. Humility not as self-deprecation, but as reverence before the vastness within. The moment you think you've arrived, you've already turned back toward illusion. Individuation is not a state to achieve. It is a dialogue that never ends, a conversation between consciousness and the unconscious, between the human and the eternal. At times, this dialogue becomes confrontation. The shadow will not integrate itself. You must meet it. And when you do, it rarely appears as you expect. It comes disguised in the people you dislike, the situations you avoid, the emotions you suppress. Each time you project your darkness outward, life faithfully sends it back. You blame the world for your pain, unaware that you are looking into your own reflection. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But understanding alone is not enough. You must also embrace. The shadow transforms only through relationship. To say this too is me is the beginning of liberation. The energy you spent in denial becomes available for creation. What was once destructive becomes directive. The anger that wounded now protects boundaries. The envy that consumed now inspires growth. The fear that paralyzed now alerts. The unconscious does not wish to destroy you, it wishes to complete you. Still, completion comes at a cost. The more you integrate, the less you belong to collective illusions. You see through systems built on repression, religious, political, even psychological, and the price of sight is solitude. Jung lived this himself. He endured years of inner chaos, hallucinations, and visions that would later form the Red Book. To the outside world, it looked like madness. To Jung, it was revelation, the psyche insisting on wholeness. He wrote, "To confront a person with his shadow is to show him his own light. The deeper you enter your darkness, the more authentic your radiance becomes. But you cannot skip the descent. The light you find without darkness is counterfeit, borrowed brightness that fades when tested. True illumination is the one that survives the night." At this point, many turn back. The loneliness, the doubt, the feeling of being stripped of meaning, it's too much. Yet Jung would say that this is precisely where the new center begins to form. The ego, having relinquished its throne, now orbits around something greater, the self. And the self, unlike the ego, is not interested in comfort. It seeks coherence. It reorganizes life from within, drawing together all opposites into a larger order. When you begin to live from this center, choices start to feel different. You no longer ask, "What should I do to succeed?" But "What is mine to do in truth?" You sense the pull of destiny, not as a script to follow, but as a pattern unfolding through you. Synchronicities, meaningful coincidences, appear as signals that you are aligned with this deeper order. The psyche speaks through events as much as through dreams, and yet, every alignment invites another test. The unconscious never runs out of material. As soon as one layer is integrated, another rises. Individuation, Jung said, is like climbing a spiral staircase. You circle back over familiar ground, but at a higher level of consciousness. What once enslaved you now educates you. What once terrified you now reveals wisdom. The cost of becoming yourself is perpetual vulnerability. There's no mask to hide behind, no ideology to outsource thinking, to no savior to blame. You walk naked through existence, aware that life and death are two faces of the same mystery. But in that nakedness, paradoxically, lies strength. Because when you stop pretending to be invincible, you discover you were never alone. The same archetypal forces that tore you open now stand beside you as allies, the warrior, the healer, the sage, each an expression of the self moving through your finite story. And slowly you understand what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." It's not privilege in the worldly sense. It's privilege in the sacred sense to participate consciously in creation, to let the divine unfold through your small and temporary form. Individuation does not crown you. It consecrates you. It does not make you superior. It makes you sincere. It does not lift you above humanity. It roots you deeper within it. The third movement of Jung's vision opens in the quiet aftermath of transformation, when the storm has passed, but the air still hums with what was lost and gained. After the fire there is silence. After the descent, a strange stillness, not peace exactly, but presence. You have shed the costume of who you thought you were, but you are not yet sure who stands in the ashes. This is the liminal space of individuation, the interval between the death of the old self and the birth of the real. In this threshold, the psyche feels raw. Your familiar habits no longer fit, but the new ones haven't yet formed. You begin to sense life not as a series of external events, but as a conversation with the inner world. The unconscious, once feared, becomes a collaborator. Dreams no longer appear as random sequences, but as coded instructions from a deeper intelligence. Jung believed that within each person lives a guiding center, the self, which orchestrates these patterns like an invisible compass. When you ignore it, life becomes chaos. When you align with it, even the chaos reveals a hidden rhythm. But alignment demands obedience to something beyond the ego. You start noticing a moral dimension that isn't about right or wrong as society defines them, but about fidelity to your own soul. Betraying that inner law brings a peculiar suffering, the sense that you are abandoning yourself. Following it, however, often costs you external approval. The paradox is that the more individuated you become, the less you can conform without violence to your truth. This is why Jung said, "The individual who is not individuated becomes a mere particle of the collective." In a world addicted to imitation, authenticity looks like rebellion. You stop parroting borrowed convictions. You stop using busyness as a disguise for emptiness. And in the spaces that open, you hear the faint hum of your own vocation. Not career, not role vocation. in the older sense, a calling. Something in you that was waiting before you were born begins to stir. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't demand applause, it asks for devotion. To follow it, you must learn to live by inner authority, the still small voice that says, "This way," even when reason hesitates. That voice often contradicts logic, but it never contradicts meaning. It leads you not toward comfort, but toward coherence, the deep sense that your outer life mirrors your inner reality. For Jung, this coherence was the hallmark of psychological health. Not the absence of conflict, but the integration of it. The tension between opposites, conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, order and chaos, is not an error. It's the crucible where the self is forged. To live this way is to see life symbolically. You begin to read everything, dreams, relationships, coincidences, illnesses, as messages from the psyche. The world becomes alive again, not a machine, but a mirror. You recognize the divine not as a doctrine, but as a pattern woven through all things. Jung called this the numinous experience, the moment when the boundary between inner and outer dissolves, and you feel for a breathless second that reality is speaking your language. But such revelation is not permanent. It flickers. You taste unity and then fall back into division. This rhythm, expansion and contraction, revelation and doubt, is the heartbeat of individuation. It teaches patience with the unfinished. The self is not a static entity. It's a process that unfolds through every choice, every mistake, every reconciliation. Jung compared it to a mandala, a circular image representing the totality of the psyche. In dreams and visions, people often drew or saw mandalas without knowing why. To Jung, they were spontaneous symbols of wholeness emerging from chaos. When you begin to live from this center, even suffering changes texture. Pain no longer feels pointless. It becomes communication. Depression becomes dissent. Anxiety becomes awakening. The psyche uses discomfort as its grammar. Every symptom, a sentence, every crisis, a paragraph, all spelling out the story of who you are meant to become. If you listen closely, even despair has direction. Still, this listening is costly. It requires quieting the modern instinct to explain, justify, or escape. Individuation is not accomplished through analysis alone, but through relationship with others, with art, with the sacred. Jung himself found that creating images from his inner world, drawing, painting, writing dialogues with the unconscious, was essential to integration. He urged others to do the same, to give form to the formless, to make the invisible visible. When you externalize the inner material, you meet it differently, not as a threat, but as a companion. The practice of dialogue with the unconscious is not a metaphor, it's a discipline. It means taking your inner world seriously enough to converse with it. Jung called it active imagination. The process of entering into the image rather than interpreting it from above. When a figure appears in a dream, a child, an animal, a stranger, you don't analyze it to death. You speak to it. Who are you? What do you need? Over time, this practice develops a relationship with the deeper layers of the psyche. You become both participant and witness in your own unfolding. And through that dialogue, something astonishing occurs. The opposites begin to reconcile. The masculine learns to hold the feminine without fear. The mind bows to the mystery of instinct. The heart learns the discipline of thought. The ego, once a tyrant, becomes a servant of a greater intelligence. Jung called this the self-regulating function of the psyche, the way the unconscious continually compensates the one-sidedness of consciousness. When you lean too far into control, dreams return you to surrender. When you sink into chaos, the unconscious sends images of order. This dialogue between worlds is the essence of psychological balance. It's not a fragile equilibrium, but a living tension. To maintain it, you must cultivate both discernment and surrender. Discernment to know which voice belongs to the self and which belongs to fear. Surrender to follow even when the path leads into the unknown. Jung's entire psychology could be summed up in one paradox: the way out is the way in. Every descent into your own depths is mirrored by an ascent into greater consciousness. What feels like disintegration is often incubation. The seed splits before it grows. The shell cracks before the bird breathes. The psyche, too, must break before it can bloom. To resist this breaking is to remain half alive, comfortable perhaps, but hollow. To allow it is to participate in your own evolution. And as you do, something shifts in how you see others. The more shadow you integrate, the less you need to project. Compassion deepens. You stop demanding perfection because you recognize your own fragments in everyone you meet. The people who once triggered you become teachers. The situations you once cursed become sacred classrooms. You begin to see life itself as therapy, not the clinical kind, but the divine kind, orchestrated by an intelligence vast enough to use everything, even your mistakes, for growth. At this stage, individuation is no longer about self-improvement, but self-participation. You cease trying to control the narrative and instead collaborate with it. You begin to sense that the self, that mysterious center, is not only psychological, but spiritual. It is, in Jung's words, the God within us. Not a theological claim, but an experiential one, that the source of meaning lives inside the very psyche that suffers. To know this is to live differently, to walk slower, to listen deeper, to treat your own pain as sacred material in the making of your soul. Eventually, every seeker reaches the same realization Jung did. The psyche is not a problem to solve, but a mystery to live. By the fourth movement, you no longer chase meaning like an object. You inhabit it. The path of individuation stops being something you do and becomes something that moves through you. There's no finish line, no diploma from the unconscious, only a widening participation in what Jung called the objective psyche, the soul of the world that expresses itself through individual lives. You start to recognize that everything around you mirrors what is within. The external world, with its accidents and encounters, is the living text of your own transformation. You see the way events conspire to press your psyche toward integration. What felt random begins to appear intentional, as if life itself were an analyst asking questions through circumstance. The person who irritates you, the crisis that corners you, the coincidence that startles you, they're all symbols of a deeper dialogue. To live Jung's philosophy is to interpret existence itself as a dream full of signs waiting for consciousness. But here lies another danger, the temptation to idolize insight. The mind can turn even spirituality into an escape. Jung warned that inflation does not end once you meet the self. It merely changes disguise. You can be possessed not only by ego, but by wisdom. To see patterns everywhere can become a defense against actually feeling them. Individuation isn't about floating above the world in clarity. It's about descending into it with awareness. The goal is not detachment, but incarnation, to bring what you've learned in the depths into the marketplace of ordinary life. That's why Jung returned again and again to the figure of Christ, not as dogma, but as a symbol of the fully individuated human. The crucifixion to him was not only historical, it was psychological. Each person must undergo that same process, the ego crucified, so that a larger consciousness can rise. Resurrection, then, is not escape from matter, but the sanctification of it. The divine does not live apart from the human, it seeks expression through it. To live consciously is to participate in that ongoing incarnation. At this depth, you begin to perceive that the opposites you once struggled to reconcile, good and evil, light and dark, spirit and matter, are not enemies, but partners in the evolution of consciousness. Wholeness does not mean moral neutrality. It means moral maturity, the ability to hold complexity without collapse. Jung's dangerous idea, when fully absorbed, dismantles simplistic categories. It asks you to grow beyond the comfort of purity and into the responsibility of integration. To know your shadow and still choose the light that is the ethics of the individuated soul. Yet this choice is never permanent. The work repeats. Jung called it the opus contra naturam, the work against nature, because it requires swimming upstream against every instinct toward comfort and conformity. You will be tempted to regress, to retreat into the familiar mask, to trade truth for belonging. But once consciousness expands, it cannot return to its old dimensions without suffering. That suffering is the soul's rebellion against its own betrayal. The self does not punish, it persists, and so life continues to present you with mirrors demanding honesty. Each relationship, each failure, each unexpected grace becomes another experiment in awareness. Individuation is not a private journey, it's a relational one. You discover the self through others, through love, through conflict, through forgiveness. The divine hides in the very faces that test your patience. To love them without possession, to serve them without losing yourself, that is the alchemy of maturity. As you age in this work, your attitude toward death begins to change. Jung saw death not as a negation, but as the natural completion of individuation. The psyche, having labored to unite its fragments, prepares to return to the larger field from which it came. The self, eternal in essence, withdraws its projection from the body. What remains is peace, not the absence of struggle, but the fulfillment of purpose. To have become yourself fully is to have lived enough. But for those still walking, the task remains humble to stay conscious in the small things. To notice the archetypes moving through your daily life, the caregiver in your tenderness, the warrior in your boundaries, the sage in your silence. To realize that your morning routine, your arguments, your laughter are all stages on the same sacred theater where the soul learns to see itself. Individuation, in the end, is not about becoming extraordinary. It's about remembering the extraordinariness of the ordinary once you see it illuminated from within. Jung's psychology is not self-centered. It is world-centered. It leads back to service, to participation, to gratitude. The individuated person doesn't escape society. They help redeem it simply by existing as a whole human being in a fragmented world. So when you ask, what does it cost to become myself? The answer is everything that is not real. And what do you gain? The quiet astonishment of belonging to existence itself. The ability to look at your life with all its contradictions and scars and whisper, "This too is me." That whisper is the mark of integration. It's the sound of the psyche bowing to its own vastness. It's the prayer of someone who has finally stopped running from the fire and learned to walk in its light. Individuation is dangerous because it destroys falsehoods. But what it leaves behind is indestructible, the simple, radiant fact of being.